North America's trade relationship is crumbling, and Trump is the reason. While the world focuses on his tariff wars with individual countries, a shocking revelation from Mexico's halls of power suggests something far more devastating is happening. The era of trilateral trade deals between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is ending, according to a veteran Mexican lawmaker who spoke with CBC News just moments before Trump himself confirmed this explosive prediction during Prime Minister Trudeau's visit to the White House.
Arrived at the White House for his working lunch with U.S. President Donald Trump.
We're going to be talking about trade. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things.
In a 32-minute Oval Office meeting, Trump called Carney a great man several times, adding he's confident they'd work through the issues preventing a deal on tariffs.
He's a world-class leader. He's a man that knows what he wants, and I'm not surprised to see that he won the election and won it substantially, and I would think he's more popular now. He's a good man. He does a great job, and he's a tough negotiator.
He's a great man, and you want to do a deal with Canada. Why aren't you?
Because I want to be a great man, too.
Trump says the two countries are in a natural business conflict because Canada and the U.S. want to make similar things on both sides of the border.
It's a tough situation because we want to make our cars here. At the same time, we want Canada to do well making cars. So we're working on formulas, and I think we'll get there.
We're talking about the potential collapse of USMCA, the trade agreement that governs $2 trillion in annual commerce between three nations and affects the livelihoods of over 500 million people. This isn't just another trade spat. This is Trump systematically dismantling one of the most successful trade partnerships in modern history. So what exactly did this Mexican official reveal? And why are Trump's own words proving him right? To understand the magnitude of what's happening, we need to rewind the clock to see just how much is at stake. Since NAFTA's inception in 1994 and its replacement with CUSMA in 2020, North America has operated as the world's largest free trade zone. The numbers are staggering. Trilateral merchandise trade between Canada, the United States, and Mexico reached $2.01 trillion in 2024. A 4% increase from the previous year. This massive economic engine has created integrated supply chains spanning all three countries, with Canadian companies investing $46.5 billion directly in Mexico in 2024 alone. The automotive sector exemplifies this integration, with car parts crossing borders multiple times before final assembly, creating efficiencies that benefit consumers and workers across the continent. But Trump's nationalist agenda is tearing this carefully constructed system apart. His administration has imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automotive products, disrupting supply chains that took decades to build. The ripple effects are already visible. Steel and aluminum exports have plummeted, thousands of manufacturing jobs have been lost, and businesses are scrambling to adapt to an increasingly unpredictable trade environment. What makes this particularly damaging is that these aren't temporary measures, they represent a fundamental shift in how Trump views international commerce. Deputy Germán Martínez Cazares, a former member of Mexico's ruling National Regeneration Movement Party, delivered the bombshell assessment during a sitting of Mexico's Chamber of Deputies. Speaking with CBC News, he declared that the existing trilateral agreement won't survive the nationalist pressures being exerted by both the current U.S. and Mexican administrations. We are going to see bilateral agreements between Mexico and Canada, between Mexico and the United States, Martínez Cazares said. We are entering into uncertain territory. This wasn't just one politician's opinion. It was a calculated assessment from someone who understands the political dynamics at play. What makes Martínez Cazares' prediction particularly chilling is the timing. Not long after he spoke with CBC News, Trump himself seemed to confirm this trajectory. During Prime Minister Trudeau's visit to the White House, when asked by a reporter if he was committed to the current trilateral trade agreement, Trump suggested he was open to doing different deals with individual countries. The president's exact words were, "We could renegotiate it, and that would be good, or we can just do different deals." We're allowed to do different deals. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was Trump telegraphing his intent to fracture North America's integrated trade system. The Mexican media immediately understood the significance of Trump's comments. At least three major Mexican newspapers ran front-page stories the following day, each using variations of headlines saying Trump threatened to scrap CUSMA, known in Mexico as TMEC. This wasn't just news, it was a wake-up call to Mexican businesses and policymakers about the precarious future of their economic relationship with their northern neighbors. The fact that Trump's words dominated Mexican headlines demonstrates how seriously our southern neighbor is taking this threat. Trump's comments were amplified by his trade representative Jamieson Greer, who questioned the utility of the trilateral deal just days earlier. Greer argued that the individual U.S. relationships with Canada and Mexico were so different in so many ways that it led one to question, why did we bundle it together? This wasn't random musing, this was laying the groundwork for dismantling the trilateral structure that has defined North American trade for over 3 decades. The human cost of this uncertainty is already mounting. Canadian steel and aluminum workers have seen their exports plummet under Trump's tariffs. Auto sector employees are watching nervously as integrated supply chains face disruption. Small businesses that relied on predictable trade rules are struggling to adapt to Trump's mercurial policy changes. These aren't abstract economic statistics. They're real people whose livelihoods depend on the stability that CUSMA was designed to provide. Mexico's response reveals the depth of concern about Trump's intentions. President Claudia Sheinbaum attempted to downplay the crisis during her morning press conference, saying there was always room for bilateral discussions under the existing trilateral framework. Because there are important things between Mexico and the U.S. and Canada, and between Canada and Mexico. Not necessarily all the meetings have to be trilateral, she said, but this diplomatic language couldn't mask the underlying anxiety about what Trump's bilateral preference really means for Mexico's economic future. Mexico's Foreign Affairs Secretary Juan Ramón de la Fuente Ramírez faced a barrage of media questions about the issue, desperately trying to maintain optimism about seeing CUSMA through its scheduled 2026 review process. He even invoked Trudeau's name, noting that the Canadian Prime Minister also has the same perspective in favor of the review and the renewal of the trade deal. But these reassurances ring hollow when Trump himself is openly discussing different deals and questioning the fundamental premise of trilateral cooperation. The economic implications of fragmenting North America's trade relationship are staggering. Canada has invested heavily in Mexico as a strategic partner, with Export Development Canada identifying Mexico as a priority market. Canadian companies dominate foreign investment in Mexico's mining sector and have invested approximately $10 billion in the energy sector. In 1993, Canadian direct investment in Mexico was a mere $3 billion. The growth to $46.5 billion by 2024 demonstrates how CUSMA created certainty and stability for Canadian capital. Trump's approach threatens to unravel these carefully constructed economic relationships. During his meeting with Trudeau, Trump revealed his zero-sum thinking about trade, telling the Canadian Prime Minister that the U.S. and Canada have a natural conflict because both countries want car companies and steel production. The problem we have is that they want a car company and I want a car company. They want steel and we want steel, Trump explained. This reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern integrated economies work, or perhaps a deliberate choice to ignore those benefits in favor of narrow nationalism.
Considering that we're allies, considering the closeness of the U.S.-Canada relationship, Eric, for so many years, this long history, but Trump saying, it's the closeness, according to Trump, that he says makes it so hard to make this deal, which seems counterintuitive. He goes on to say it's a complicated agreement, more complicated maybe than any other agreement we have on trade, because, we have a natural conflict. We also have mutual love. I don't understand how Prime Minister Carney could even kind of grasp where Canada is at when you hear, on the one hand this, but on the one hand that, on the one hand this, on the one hand that. We know this is classic Trump, but it's like a lot of love, but not a lot of connection when it comes to deal making.
The automotive sector illustrates the absurdity of Trump's approach. Modern car manufacturing relies on integrated supply chains where components cross borders multiple times before final assembly. A typical North American vehicle contains parts from all 3 CUSMA countries, creating efficiencies that benefit consumers through lower prices, and workers through specialized manufacturing jobs. Trump's vision of separate bilateral deals would fragment these supply chains, likely making cars more expensive for American consumers, while eliminating jobs in all three count rise. Canadian officials are clearly struggling to respond to Trump's chaotic approach. Prime Minister Trudeau has attempted to maintain diplomatic language while pushing back against Trump's more extreme positions. When Trump used the word conflict to describe Canada-US trade relations, Trudeau gently corrected him, saying the two countries merely compete, and noting that there are more areas where we are stronger together. But this diplomatic finesse may be insufficient against Trump's bulldozer approach to international relations. The timing of this crisis couldn't be worse for North American competitiveness. As China continues to build economic partnerships around the world and the European Union strengthens its internal market, North America risks fragmenting its own competitive advantages. The integrated North American market of 500 million consumers and a combined GDP of $42 trillion has been a powerful force for economic growth and innovation. Trump's preference for bilateral deals threatens to sacrifice this competitive advantage on the altar of nationalist rhetoric. What's particularly frustrating is that Trump himself once understood the value of trilateral cooperation. When he signed USMCA in 2001, he called it a colossal victory and the best trade deal ever made. The agreement he now seems eager to fragment was negotiated by his own administration as an improvement over NAFTA. This flip-flopping reveals either a fundamental lack of understanding about trade policy or a willingness to sacrifice economic benefits for political theater. The uncertainty surrounding USMCA's future is already having real economic consequences. Businesses are delaying investment decisions, unsure whether the rules governing their operations will remain stable. Supply chain managers are developing contingency plans for a world where integrated North American manufacturing might no longer be viable. Financial markets are pricing in additional risk premiums for North American trade-dependent companies. Mexican lawmakers like Martinez Cazares aren't making these predictions lightly. They understand that the nationalist pressures in both the US and Mexico create political incentives for leaders to pursue bilateral rather than multilateral solutions. Mexico's own governing party has embraced economic nationalism in some sectors, making it potentially receptive to Trump's bilateral approach, even if it's economically suboptimal. The broader implications extend beyond economics to geopolitical strategy. An integrated North American economy has been a cornerstone of Western economic power, providing a counterweight to China's growing influence and a model for other regions considering deeper economic integration. If Trump succeeds in fragmenting this relationship, it will send a signal to the rest of the world that even the most successful trade partnerships are vulnerable to nationalist populism. Canada finds itself in a particularly precarious position.
Well, on those comments, Canada's kind of caught between Scylla and Charybdis on this. On the one hand, you have the Chinese government wanting Canada to open up its markets and to remove the unilateral tariffs that Canada imposed. On the other, you have actually a dual pressure, one from the United States government, because those tariffs are part of a strategy that first unfolded under President Biden. But then also from Canadian automakers, because of the integrated Canadian and US and Mexican auto market. So it really is in a really tough needle for the Carney government to thread to try to placate the Chinese enough to help out the canola farmers and the other agricultural products that China has been levying tariffs on, and the other not submarining our own domestic industry and not, annoying the Americans to the point that they might take retaliatory action.
As the smallest economy in the trilateral relationship, Canada has benefited enormously from guaranteed access to both the US and Mexican markets under USMCA. A shift to bilateral deals could leave Canada isolated, forced to negotiate separately with both partners from a position of relative weakness. This is exactly the scenario that USMCA was designed to prevent. The human cost of this uncertainty extends beyond job losses to include the psychological impact on communities built around integrated North American supply chains. Auto towns in Ontario, steel communities in Pennsylvania, and manufacturing centers across Mexico have all invested their futures in the assumption that North American economic integration would continue. Trump's willingness to casually discuss dismantling the system reveals a callous disregard for the real-world consequences of his trade policies. Looking ahead, the scheduled 2026 review of CUSMA was supposed to be a routine process to fine-tune an already successful agreement. Instead, it's shaping up to be a potential death knell for trilateral cooperation in North America. Trump's comments about different deals and his administration's questioning of the trilateral framework suggest that the review process may become a vehicle for fragmenting rather than strengthening North American trade relationships. The irony is that Trump's approach may ultimately weaken American economic competitiveness. The integrated North American market has allowed Can companies to remain globally competitive by accessing specialized suppliers and efficient production networks across all three countries?
Entity list, which imposes technology restrictions, the U.S. extended not just to listees, but to subsidiaries. And there are other measures, including just yesterday, the House or the Senate passed what's called the Fight China Act, which would impose other export control restrictions. So the Chinese probably feel like they are responding in this way and saying to the president that if you want to negotiate in sort of a business-like way, we can do that, or we can do that in a different way that is much more aggressive. And so we need to see exactly what they want to do. But I think their intentions, and the intentions on both sides, actually, both sides want a summit, both sides want a trade deal, both sides need things from each other, whether it be rare earths and chips.
Fragmenting this system may force American companies to either pay higher costs for domestic alternatives or seek suppliers in other regions, potentially including China, the very outcome Trump claims to want to avoid. What we're witnessing is the potential end of one of the most successful examples of regional economic integration in modern history. The North American trade relationship has survived multiple economic crises, political transitions, and global upheavals since NAFTA's inception. But it may not survive Trump's nationalist assault on the very concept of multilateral cooperation. The Mexican lawmakers' prediction about bilateral deals risks placing trilateral cooperation isn't just an economic forecast. It's a warning about the fragility of international institutions in the face of determined nationalist pressure. If Trump succeeds in dismantling USMCA, it will demonstrate that even the most economically beneficial international agreements are vulnerable to populist politics and zero-sum thinking. For workers, businesses, and consumers across North America, the stakes couldn't be higher. The choice between maintaining an integrated continental economy and fragmenting into separate bilateral relationships will determine the economic future of over 500 million people. Trump's casual willingness to sacrifice trilateral cooperation for the illusion of bilateral advantage reveals the dangerous short-sightedness of his approach to international economic policy. The era of North American economic integration may indeed be ending, just as the Mexican lawmaker predicted. But this isn't an inevitable result of economic forces or changing global dynamics. It's the direct consequence of Trump's nationalist ideology and his fundamental misunderstanding of how modern economies work. The question now is whether the economic and political costs of this fragmentation will become apparent before it's too late to reverse course. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how Trump's trade wars are affecting other international relationships, check out our other video. And if you want to stay updated on how Trump's policies are reshaping global economics and trade relationships, be sure to subscribe for more in-depth analyses and breaking news.